Today for Devotions with Daniella, and absolutely not because they freak out every time you talk about them. We are reading 12-step horror stories, true tales of misery, betrayal, and abuse in Alcoholics Anonymous. 2. Berenice, don't be angry. It's not spiritual. This is a very long story, so we'll only get to read part of it. Shortly after I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was assaulted by two men. I was a young woman of 24 who had just finished college, graduating with a bachelor's degree and a drinking problem. I landed in a low bottom meeting, and suddenly, in AA as a newcomer, I was the lowest on the totem pole. The other AAs with more time enjoyed higher status. Take the cotton from your ears and put it in your mouth, they said. Shut up and listen. These are called thought-stopping cliches in cults. I learned that since I was the new arrival, I was sick indeed. Insane, they said. You have a disease. It's a disease of the perception. I befriended a group of young people in my first year. One girl in particular, a wild and happy MTV type, took me under her wing. We went to various meetings, sober dances, day trips to the city. She introduced me to the various AA members at the clubhouse, including a young man named Chuck who lived near the AA club. He had 5 years clean and sober. He told me his sad story. Chuck had been adopted by one of the wealthiest families in the United States as a white baby boy. They were not aware that he was really a mixed-race child, but as he got older, he turned black. Because of this and some behavioral problems which manifested only later in life, he had been banished by his family to live in a low-supervision group home near the AA club. I felt sorry for him after hearing his tale of woe. But luckily, he was on the right track now. He was working a program. Despite his living arrangements, he seemed to be more gentle and together than the other people at that meeting, who appeared quite bizarre and were speaking in contradictions. Defeat is victory. Powerlessness is empowering. The more dependent we are on the program, the more independent we actually become. Thought-stopping cliches, and not one of those makes bit of sense. My early days in AA were confusing to say the least. I got a sponsor, a young woman who spoke to me on the phone a few times, then ran off with one of the men from the meeting, never to be seen again. Most of the other women seemed angry, and many of them were dating the men in the group. Since I had never been to AA, I had no way of judging this, but I had heard men with the men and women with the women. But it was not repeated often, and the members modeled behavior which went contrary to this catchphrase. In fact, a lot of the behavior went contrary to what was preached. Nevertheless, I figured that people date and opposite genders mingle in the outside world, so it didn't seem wrong to me. Besides, they weren't drinking. That's what I cared about. The AA members kept asking if I would go to any length to get what they had, but despite their claims of happiness and serenity, many of them seemed worse off than my drinking friends. I relapsed several times in the beginning for two reasons. First, I really couldn't accept that I would have to go to these meetings and be among these people for the rest of my life, even if it was one day at a time. Second, I had fully internalized step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them. I felt so much guilt and shame over having hurt my parents with my drinking that I felt an overwhelming compulsion to make it up to them. The looming steps written on the banner hanging on the wall of the meeting room seemed to tower over me and remind me on a daily basis of the pain I had caused my family by rebelling against their values. This is a normal developmental stage for any adolescent, as I later learned. This time around, I made a promise to myself that I would obey all the family rules. This thing calls herself the family. After all, I learned from an early age that it is God's will to honor thy parents. Never mind, I thought she was calling AA the family. And now I learned in AA that as a recovering alcoholic, I was to do God's will, which was not so subtly hinted to be that which is taught by Christian religions. And so I did. But living life that way was extremely stressful. Perhaps this is why I had rebelled in the first place. It was so stressful that relapse was inevitable. The relapses came, and they were coupled with the usual guilt and shame. But I kept returning to AA because I knew of no other answer to my drinking problem. AA did a good job of indoctrinating fear into me, the newcomer, someone who was already coming from a fearful place. An alcoholic's fate is jails, institutions, or death. My new friend Chuck didn't object to my relapses. He would come to bars with me and keep me company while I drank. It felt kind of strange that an AA member with 5 years should be coming with me to bars, but I let it go. After all, he wasn't pouring the drinks down my throat. Life was tough in early sobriety, very tough, and one night I relapsed on some rum at my parents' house where I was living. I decided to leave the house before it took effect, since the last thing I wanted to do was break their hearts again by having them see me drunk. I just wasn't prepared to face the shame of such an encounter. Again, I was acutely aware of all the persons I had harmed and knew that my task was to make amends and humble myself with prayer in order to remove my character defects. I was completely riddled with guilt. My MTV AA girlfriend had run away to the West Coast by this time, and Chuck was my only friend left. So I drove in my father's car to Chuck's home, hoping to sober up there. Seeing me arrive in a drunken state, he appeared to have no intention of letting me wait there until I sobered up. He appeared to have a different agenda and was behaving in an uncharacteristically aggressive way. I had never seen him this way. I later learned he had gone off his meds. He tried to physically drag me into the house. I was scared and I fought him, trying to get away. My car keys got lost in the struggle. Out of nowhere, a truck arrived at the scene and Chuck's friend, Lenny, got out. Lenny was not a resident of the home, just a friend of Chuck's. Seeing the struggle, he got a baseball bat from his truck and Chuck in the head until he was covered in... I remembered seeing the dark blood running down Chuck's face. It glistened in the moonlight. I was horrified at what had happened and scared out of my wits, but I was also happy to have been rescued, as Chuck was acting like a madman and I was terrified of him. Good old HP had sent one of his angels to rescue me. I'm so grateful to my higher power who is looking out for me. There are no coincidences. Calls love to say that one. Since I had no car keys and Chuck's home was in a remote area in the woods, I had no choice but to go with Lenny. I was afraid of running because there was nowhere to go and Chuck might come after me. I got into the truck and was taken away. Lenny tried to calm me down by talking to me. Then he stopped at a liquor store and picked up a 6-pack. We got to his house and he told me to sit down. He then went into another room with the beers. He brought me back a glass of beer. I remember taking one sip, then losing consciousness immediately. I later find out that there is a high likelihood it contained a drug. I regained consciousness in the bathtub with him doing the things. Immediately, I pushed him away and got dressed, feeling completely sickened and degraded. This was a new level of shame that I had never before experienced. Luckily, he cooperated, but not without telling me what a great time I had with him. Heh heh heh. He laughed in a victorious psychopathic cackle. I will never forget it. But there was an upside. AA had taught me that repeated humiliation would help me achieve the requisite state of humility, which I needed in order to maintain my new sober lifestyle. Cool. Lenny then drove me back to Chuck's house to get my car. As I mentioned, the car keys had dropped onto the ground during the earlier struggle. Chuck and I found the key and he agreed to drive me home since I was terribly shaken up and still coming off whatever Lenny had slipped me, as well as the alcohol. I realized I was in no condition to drive. We returned to my house and I told Chuck to go sleep in the guest room. It must have been 4 a.m. and I lay down in my bed. A few hours later, I woke up because I felt someone's presence in the room. Chuck was in my bed. I whispered angrily and instructed him to get out, but he would not leave. He insisted that otherwise he would tell my parents about my relapse. The last thing I wanted was to hurt my parents again because I loved them more than anything in the world. I could not face the shame of them finding out. So I gave in angrily, knowing that I was already just a worthless whole. It goes on. It goes on.